The smell of gunpowder and whiskey still hung in the air from last night's saloon brawl, when Hannah Rose pushed open the heavy oak door of Hangtown Bank and Trust, her worn leather boots clicking against the polished floor as she clutched the leather satchel containing 3 months of loan payments she had scraped together from selling every spare chicken and bushel of wheat her small ranch could produce. It was August 1875, and the California gold rush had long since faded, leaving behind towns like Hangtown filled with men who had traded prospecting pans for 3-piece suits and discovered that squeezing desperate farmers for every last penny proved far more profitable than digging in creek beds. Hannah had inherited her father's ranch 2 years ago, when cholera took both her parents within a week of each other, leaving her at 22 years old with 200 acres of stubborn soil, a dozen cattle, and a mortgage that seemed to grow heavier with each passing season. The bank felt cold despite the summer heat baking the dusty streets outside. Mahogany panels lined the walls, and behind the teller cage sat a thin man with spectacles who refused to meet her eyes as she approached. She knew that look. It was the same expression the shopkeeper wore when he refused her credit, the same glance the church ladies gave her when they whispered about a woman trying to run a ranch alone. "I am here to see Mr. Pemberton," Hannah said, setting her satchel on the marble counter with more force than necessary. "I have this month's payment plus the 2 I missed during the drought." The teller's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "Mr. Pemberton is expecting you, Miss Rose. He said to send you directly to his office when you arrived." Something about his tone made her stomach clench, but Hannah squared her shoulders and walked toward the door marked with gold lettering. She had dealt with Cyrus Pemberton before. The banker was a large man who had arrived in Hangtown 5 years ago with enough capital to buy out the previous bank owner, and he had spent every day since then acquiring properties from families who could not meet their payments. Her father had warned her about men like Pemberton, men who smiled with their mouths but kept calculating eyes that only saw dollar signs where other people saw homes and dreams. She knocked twice and entered without waiting for permission. Pemberton sat behind an enormous desk, his substantial frame filling a leather chair that probably cost more than her entire year's cattle earnings. His face was round and flushed, his dark hair slicked back with pomade, and his fingers were thick as sausages as they drummed against the desktop. "Miss Rose," he said, his voice oily smooth, "please do sit down. I prefer to stand." Hannah lifted her satchel. "I have your money, every cent I owe plus interest." Pemberton's smile never reached his eyes. "I am afraid there has been a complication with your loan." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What complication?" The terms were clear. "My father signed that note and I have been honoring it." "Your father signed that note, yes, but upon reviewing our records, my accountant discovered several irregularities." Pemberton opened a drawer and pulled out a ledger, making a show of flipping through pages. "It seems there were additional fees that were not properly recorded. Administrative costs, property assessment charges, late payment penalties that compound daily." "That is not possible." "I have copies of everything my father signed." "Do you?" Pemberton's smile widened. "How unfortunate that your copies may not reflect the actual terms of the agreement. The document we have on file, the legal document that any court would recognize, shows a substantially different picture of your financial obligations." Hannah's hands trembled, but she kept her voice steady. "How much are you claiming I owe?" "With all fees and penalties calculated, your current debt stands at $8,200. The number was impossible. Her entire property was worth perhaps $3,000 at most. You are lying. You changed the terms." "Miss Rose, I would advise you to be very careful about making accusations." Pemberton stood, his bulk making the desk seem smaller. You are a woman alone trying to manage affairs that are clearly beyond your capabilities. I am actually here to help you. Help me. The laugh that escaped her throat was bitter. I am prepared to take possession of the property and clear your debt entirely. You would be free to find more suitable employment, perhaps as a seamstress or a cook. There are families in town who need domestic help. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Everything her parents had worked for, the land her father had cleared with his own hands, the house her mother had filled with love and laughter, all of it was about to be stolen by a man who had never worked an honest day in his life. I will get a lawyer, Hannah said. I will fight this. With what money? Pemberton moved around the desk, coming too close. Miss Rose, you can barely afford food. How will you pay for legal representation? And even if you could, do you really think any judge in this county will side with you over me? I own this town. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. Hannah recognized the thick paper, the red wax seal that marked official deeds, her property deed. This will be much easier if you simply sign the transfer papers, Pemberton said, pulling out another document. You can walk out of here today with no debt and a fresh start. Never. The word came out as a snarl. Pemberton's expression hardened. I was hoping you would be reasonable, but I see that stubbornness runs in your family. Your father was the same way, always thinking he was smarter than everyone else. Look where it got him. Before Hannah could react, Pemberton grabbed her wrist with surprising speed for a man his size. His other hand seized the deed firmly. I will make this very simple, Miss Rose. This property is mine now. If you refuse to accept that, I will have the sheriff escort you from town. I hear there are mining camps up north that are always looking for women, though I doubt you would enjoy that kind of work. The threat was clear and vile. Hannah tried to pull away, but his grip was iron tight. She was strong from years of ranch work, but he outweighed her by at least 100 pounds. Panic began to claw at her throat as she realized how alone she was, how the teller outside would never intervene, how the law in Hangtown answered to the man who held her future in his meaty fist. Let me go, she demanded, her voice rising. Not until you understand your situation. Pemberton's breath smelled of cigars and coffee. You have no power here. You have no options. You will sign these papers, or I will make your life so miserable that you will beg me to take this worthless land off your hands. The door to the office slammed open with such force that the hinges screamed. Hannah and Pemberton both jerked toward the sound. Standing in the doorway was a man who seemed to fill the entire frame despite being lean rather than bulky. He wore dusty range clothes, a dark brown shirt and worn denim, with a black hat pulled low over his eyes. His jaw was set hard as granite, and his hand rested casually on the revolver at his hip. The lady said to let her go. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but there was something in it that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Pemberton released Hannah's wrist immediately, his face flushing deeper red. This is private business, Cowboy. Get out of my bank. The stranger stepped inside, and Hannah could see him more clearly now. He was probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that was all hard angles and weathered tan. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and right now they were locked on Pemberton with an intensity that made the banker take an involuntary step backward. Private business, the stranger repeated. Is that what you call forcing yourself on a woman? Interesting definition. I was conducting a legal transaction, Pemberton blustered. Miss Rose owes this bank a substantial sum, and I was simply explaining her options. Her options, the man said flatly. His gaze shifted to Hannah, and something in his expression softened just a fraction. Are you hurt, madam? Hannah shook her head, finding her voice. He is trying to steal my ranch. He changed the terms of my father's loan and now claims I owe an impossible amount. The stranger's jaw tightened. That's so. He turned back to Pemberton. Let me see the deed you are holding. This is none of your concern, Mr. Turner. This matter is between me and Miss Rose. Turner, Hannah breathed. She had heard that name. Ambrose Turner owned the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, the Circle T Ranch that sprawled across 5,000 acres in the foothills east of Hangtown. She had never met him personally, but everyone knew of the Turner family. They had been ranching this territory since before California was even a state, had fought drought and rustlers, and everything else the land could throw at them, and had not only survived but thrived. Ambrose Turner took another step forward. Pemberton, I am going to say this once, and I suggest you listen carefully. Give Miss Rose her deed. Or what? Pemberton clutched the document to his chest. You will shoot me, in broad daylight in front of witnesses. You may be rich, Turner, but you are not above the law. The law, Ambrose said, his voice dripping with contempt. You mean the law that lets you forge documents and extort honest people, that law. He reached into his own coat and pulled out a thick envelope. I just came from the telegraph office. Funny thing about having business connections in San Francisco. You can find out all sorts of interesting information about a man, like how Cyrus Pemberton was run out of Sacramento for fraud, how you barely avoided prison time by agreeing to never practice banking in that city again. The color drained from Pemberton's face. You are bluffing. Am I? Ambrose tossed the envelope onto the desk. That is a full report from a private investigator, along with witness statements and copies of court documents. I was going to present it to the territorial governor next time I was in Sacramento, probably next month. But I could be persuaded to make that trip sooner. Tomorrow, perhaps. Hannah watched as Pemberton's bravado crumbled like a sand castle in the tide. His eyes darted between Ambrose and the envelope, and his fingers trembled slightly as they clutched her deed. Of course, Ambrose continued, his voice casual but his eyes hard as flint. If certain documents were returned to their rightful owners and certain fraudulent loans were corrected to reflect their actual terms, I might decide that such a trip was not necessary. Might decide that a man deserves a second chance, even if he does not deserve it. The silence stretched out, thick with tension. Hannah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She wanted to speak, to demand her property back, but some instinct told her to let Ambrose handle this. He clearly knew what he was doing, and Pemberton was responding to him in a way the banker never would have responded to her alone. Finally, Pemberton's shoulders sagged. Fine, he muttered. There may have been some clerical errors in Miss Rose's account. May have been, Ambrose repeated. Try again. There were errors. Pemberton practically spat the words. The loan amount was miscalculated. And what is the actual amount owed? Pemberton's mouth twisted. $340. Hannah gasped. That was less than half of what she had in her satchel. The amount her father had originally borrowed, with only the agreed-upon interest. The real terms before Pemberton's creative accounting. That sounds more accurate, Ambrose said. So Miss Rose will pay you what she actually owes, and you will return her deed along with a signed statement correcting the loan terms. You will also waive any future interest for the next 6 months, as compensation for your mistake and for the distress you have caused. That is not standard banking practice, Pemberton protested weakly. Neither is fraud. Ambrose's hand had never left his gun, and now he let his fingers drum lightly against the grip. Do we have an agreement, Pemberton, or should I saddle up for Sacramento tonight? The banker's face was purple now, but he was beaten and he knew it. With shaking hands, he set Hannah's deed on the desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "I will need to draft the corrected statement." "You do that," Ambrose said. "And Pemberton, I will be checking on Miss Rose's account personally. Regular like. Any future errors, and that envelope goes to the governor's office by express rider." "Understood." Pemberton nodded stiffly and bent over his desk, his pen scratching angrily across the paper. Hannah stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. 5 minutes ago she had been on the verge of losing everything. Now Ambrose Turner, a man she had never even met, had just saved her ranch and possibly her life. When Pemberton finally shoved the completed statement across the desk, Ambrose picked it up and read it carefully. "Miss Rose, would you verify this is correct?" Hannah stepped forward on shaking legs and took the paper. The new terms were exactly as her father had signed, with the 6-month interest waiver Ambrose had demanded. It was more than fair. It was generous. "It is correct," she managed to say. "Then pay the man what you owe him and let us get out of this place." Hannah opened her satchel with trembling fingers and counted out $340 in small bills and coins. Pemberton snatched the money without counting it, then thrust her deed toward her like it burned his fingers. Hannah took it and held it to her chest, feeling the tears she had been holding back start to sting her eyes. "We are done here," Ambrose said. He gestured toward the door. "After you, madam." Hannah walked out of the office in a daze, past the teller who was pretending very hard to have heard nothing, and out into the blazing afternoon sun. The heat hit her like a wall after the cool interior, but she barely noticed. She made it 3 steps down the wooden sidewalk before her knees gave out. Ambrose caught her before she could fall, his strong hand steadying her with surprising gentleness. "Easy now, just breathe." "I do not understand," Hannah said, and she hated how her voice shook. "Why did you help me?" "You do not even know me." Ambrose's storm-gray eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something other than anger in them. There was kindness there, and a deep weariness, as if he had seen too much of the world's ugliness. "I was riding into town for supplies when I heard shouting from the bank," he said. "I looked through the window and saw Pemberton grab you. No man should lay hands on a woman like that, especially not a weasel like him." "But the investigator report, the information from Sacramento, how did you have all that ready?" A faint smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "I did not. That envelope contained supply invoices from my ranch foreman, but Pemberton did not know that, and men like him always have dirty secrets. I gambled that he would believe I had found his, and it paid off." Hannah stared at him in amazement. "You bluffed. You saved my ranch with a bluff." "Not entirely," Ambrose said. "I will send telegrams to Sacramento tonight. If there is dirt on Pemberton, and I would bet my best horse there is, I will find it. Men like him do not stop unless they are stopped. The next woman he tries this with might not have someone walk in at the right moment." The tears finally spilled over, running down Hannah's dusty cheeks. She was not a woman who cried easily. Ranch work had made her tough, had taught her to swallow pain and keep moving. But the release of fear and tension was too much, and suddenly she was sobbing against the chest of a man she had met 10 minutes ago. To his credit, Ambrose did not seem uncomfortable. He just stood there, solid as an oak tree, one hand patting her shoulder awkwardly while she soaked his shirt with tears and probably snot. When she finally pulled herself together, he handed her a relatively clean handkerchief from his pocket. "I am sorry," Hannah said, wiping her face. "I do not usually fall apart like this." "You just almost lost everything," Ambrose said. "I would be more worried if you were not upset." He glanced up at the sun, gauging the time. "Have you eaten today?" The question caught her off guard. "I had some bread this morning." That is not a proper meal. Come on, I will buy you lunch at the hotel restaurant. You look like a strong wind could blow you over. Hannah wanted to refuse on principle. She had already accepted too much help from this stranger, had shown too much weakness. But her stomach betrayed her by growling audibly, and Ambrose's expression made it clear he would not take no for an answer. Just lunch, she said. And then I need to get back to my ranch. I have animals to tend. Just lunch, Ambrose agreed. The Hangtown Hotel restaurant was the nicest establishment in town, with white tablecloths and actual glass windows instead of oiled paper. Hannah felt acutely aware of her worn calico dress and dusty boots as the host led them to a corner table, but Ambrose seemed completely at ease despite his own trail-worn clothing. He ordered roast beef and potatoes for both of them without asking, along with coffee and pie. "You are awfully free with my choices," Hannah said, feeling some of her usual spirit returning now that the shock was fading. "If I ordered wrong, you can correct me," Ambrose said mildly, "but you need real food, and that is the best thing on the menu here." He was right, which irritated her. Hannah sat back and studied the man across from her properly for the first time. Up close, she could see the small scar on his left cheekbone, the calluses on his hands that marked him as a working rancher despite his wealth, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room as if cataloging threats. This was not a soft man, not someone who had inherited money and position without earning it. "How did you know Pemberton's name before he said it?" Hannah asked suddenly. Ambrose's expression darkened. "Because I have had dealings with him before. He tried to foreclose on one of my ranch hands 6 months ago, claimed the man owed gambling debts. It was not true, but Pemberton had forged markers. I paid off the supposed debt and warned Pemberton to stay away from my people. He agreed, but I have been watching him since then. Men like that do not change, they just find new victims. So you were already investigating him, in a manner of speaking. I have contacts in Sacramento and San Francisco from my cattle sales. I sent some inquiries, asked around. The telegrams should start coming back any day now with real information." The food arrived, and Hannah realized she was ravenous. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but the roast beef was tender and rich, and her body was demanding fuel after months of stretching every meal as far as possible. Ambrose ate his own food without comment, not watching her in a way that would have made her self-conscious. "Tell me about your ranch," he said after a while. Hannah set down her fork. "What do you want to know? How much land? What are you running? What kind of shape is it in? 200 acres, most of it grazing land, but some good creek bottomland for hay. I have a dozen cattle right now, had to sell off most of the herd to make loan payments. Some chickens, a vegetable garden, 2 horses. The house and barn are solid. My father built them to last. It is small, but it could be profitable again if I could build the herd back up." Ambrose nodded slowly. 200 acres is a good size for starting out. The land near your property, is it open range or claimed? Mix of both. Why? Just curious. He took a sip of coffee. "You run the place alone?" "I have a hand who comes by twice a week, old Mr. Garrett from town. He is too old for heavy work now, but he helps with repairs and gives me advice. Otherwise, yes, it is just me." "That is a lot of work for one person," Hannah bristled. "I manage just fine." "I was not criticizing," Ambrose said, holding up one hand. "I was observing. Running a ranch alone is brutal work even for a man. The fact that you have kept it going after your parents died says something about your grit." The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, somehow meant more than flowery praise would have. Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "I do what needs doing." "So do I," Ambrose said, "which is why I am going to make you an offer, and I want you to hear me out before you refuse." Hannah's guard went back up immediately. What kind of offer? The Circle T is a big operation. I run 2,000 head of cattle, have 30 hands working for me during peak season. But I am always looking for good grazing land to lease, especially land with water access. Your creek runs year-round, does it not? It does, Hannah said slowly. I would like to lease your grazing land, 50 acres or so. I will pay you a fair rate, and in addition, I will provide you with cattle. You can run them with my herd, and we will split the profits when we sell. That way you can rebuild your operation without having to take out new loans. It was a generous offer, more than generous. It was the kind of arrangement that could save her ranch and set her up for long-term success, which made Hannah immediately suspicious. Why would you do that? She asked bluntly. You do not know me. I could be a terrible rancher for all you know. I could let your cattle die or sell them off and run. Ambrose smiled, a real smile this time that crinkled the corners of his eyes. You could, but you will not. You stood up to Pemberton knowing you would probably lose. You came to the bank with months of payments you scraped together doing work that probably near killed you. You are stubborn and proud and you love that land. Those are the qualities I value in a partner. Partner, Hannah repeated. That is what this would be, a partnership. Equal partners, Ambrose confirmed. You provide the land and the labor on your end, I provide the cattle and the infrastructure. We both profit. And if at any point you want to buy me out and take over the whole operation yourself, we can negotiate that too. Hannah's mind was racing. It was a good offer. It was possibly the only way she could save her ranch without spending the next decade barely surviving. But there had to be a catch. Men did not just offer deals like this to women they had just met, not without wanting something in return. What do you really want from me? She asked, her voice hard. Ambrose met her eyes without flinching. I want to know that at least one person Pemberton tried to destroy will not just survive but thrive. I want to sleep at night knowing that I did something decent in a world that seems increasingly short on decency. And selfishly, I want access to good grazing land with reliable water. That is all. I am not asking you for anything else, Hannah rose. You will run your property, I will run mine, and we will help each other out as neighbors should. The use of her first name should have felt presumptuous, but somehow it did not. Hannah studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. All she saw was honesty and a bone-deep weariness that she recognized because she felt it herself. The weariness of fighting too hard for too long against a world that seemed determined to grind you down. I need time to think about it, she said finally. Of course, take all the time you need. Ambrose pulled out a small card with his name and ranch location written in neat script. That is how to find me. The offer stands whenever you are ready to discuss it, and even if you decide not to take me up on the partnership, the offer of help still stands. You need anything, you send word. Hannah took the card and tucked it into her pocket. I need to get home. My horse has been standing in the sun this whole time. I will walk you to the stable. They left the restaurant together, and Hannah was acutely aware of the stares they were getting from people on the street. Hangtown was a small town, and gossip spread faster than wildfire. By sunset, everyone would know that Hannah Rose had been seen having lunch with Ambrose Turner, and the speculation would be relentless. But she found she did not care as much as she should have. Let them talk. She still had her ranch, and that was all that mattered. At the stable, Ambrose helped her saddle her mare, a sweet-tempered bay named Clover. His hands were efficient and sure, the hands of a man who had saddled thousands of horses in his lifetime. When Clover was ready, he held the reins while Hannah mounted. Ride safe, he said, looking up at her. And Hannah, what happened today in that bank? It was not your fault. You did nothing wrong. Remember that. The words hit her harder than they should have. She had been blaming herself, wondering what she could have done differently, how she could have prevented the situation. Hearing Ambrose absolve her of that guilt made something tight in her chest loosen just a little. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." "My pleasure, madam." He tipped his hat, and Hannah urged Clover into a trot, heading out of town toward her ranch. The ride home took almost an hour, following the dusty trail that wound through scrub oak and pine. The sun was lowering toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Hannah's land started at a fence line marked by weathered posts her father had set 20 years ago. She opened the gate and led Clover through, then stopped for a moment to just look at her property. The house was small but sturdy, built from pine logs with a stone chimney. The barn needed some repair on the roof, but it was still functional. Her vegetable garden was a bit weedy, but tomatoes and squash were ripening in neat rows. The dozen cattle she had left were grazing peacefully in the distance, and she could hear her chickens clucking from their coop. It was not much, but it was hers. Her father had cleared this land with an axe and a mule. Her mother had planted the apple tree near the porch that was just starting to bear fruit. Every fence post, every stone in the fireplace, every window frame represented sweat and love and stubborn determination. She would not lose this place. She would do whatever it took to keep it. Hannah spent the rest of the evening doing her chores mechanically, her mind churning over the events of the day. She fed and watered the animals, collected eggs, pulled weeds from the garden. By the time full dark fell, she was exhausted physically but too wound up mentally to sleep. She sat on her porch with a cup of coffee and stared up at the stars, thinking about Ambrose Turner. He had saved her today, not just her ranch, but possibly her life. If Pemberton had succeeded in taking her property, she would have had nothing. No home, no money, no prospects. Women without resources ended up in situations she did not want to contemplate. And Ambrose had stopped it all with nothing more than quick thinking and sheer nerve. But was his partnership offer genuine? Could she trust a man she had just met, even if he had helped her? Hannah had learned the hard way that trusting the wrong person could destroy you. Pemberton had seemed friendly enough when her father first took out the loan. He had used words like community and neighbor and helping folks get ahead. And then he had tried to steal everything they owned. But Ambrose was different. She could feel it in her gut. The way he had looked at Pemberton with such contempt, the way he had been gentle with her when she broke down, the matter-of-fact way he offered help without making her feel weak or indebted. Those were not the actions of a manipulator. Those were the actions of a fundamentally decent man. Hannah made a decision. Tomorrow she would ride out to the Circle T and discuss the partnership in detail. She would ask hard questions and demand clear terms. And if everything checked out, if Ambrose Turner proved to be as honorable as he seemed, then she would accept his offer. She would swallow her pride and accept help, because sometimes survival mattered more than stubbornness. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Hannah dressed in her best clothes, which was not saying much, but at least her blue cotton dress was clean and not too faded. She braided her long brown hair and pinned it up, then checked her reflection in the small mirror by the door. She looked tired, she thought, and too thin. But her green eyes were clear and determined, and that would have to be enough. The ride to the Circle T took most of the morning. The Turner Ranch was northeast of her property, deeper into the foothills where the grass grew thick, and a series of natural springs provided year-round water. As Hannah rode closer, she began to see Turner cattle, prime beef stock that looked healthy and well-tended. The operation was clearly as successful as the rumors suggested. The main ranch house came into view around midday, and Hannah had to work not to gape. It was a sprawling structure, 2 stories of white painted wood with a wraparound porch and actual glass windows in every opening. Outbuildings spread out in organized clusters, a massive barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and storage sheds. Hands were working everywhere she looked, repairing fences, training horses, moving cattle. This was not just a ranch, it was an empire. Hannah felt her courage waver. What was she doing here? What could she possibly offer a man who ran an operation like this? Her 200 acres and dozen cattle were nothing compared to this, but she had come this far. She would see it through. A man emerged from the barn as she approached, an older fellow with gray hair and a weathered face. "Can I help you, miss? I am looking for Mr. Turner, Ambrose Turner. He asked me to visit." The man's eyebrows rose. "You are Miss Rose from town?" "I am." "Well, I will be. The boss said you might come by. I am Henry Thompson, foreman here." "Let me take your horse, and I will let Mr. Turner know you have arrived." Hannah dismounted and handed over Clover's reins, feeling increasingly out of place. Henry led her horse toward the barn while calling out for someone named Jacob, and within minutes Ambrose appeared from the main house. He looked different in daylight on his own property. More relaxed, more at ease. He wore work clothes similar to yesterday, but they were cleaner and he had shaved. His dark hair was still unruly, but his gray eyes lit up when he saw her. "Hannah," he said, striding across the yard. "I am glad you came. I was not sure you would." "I said I would think about your offer," Hannah replied. "I have done that. Now I would like to discuss details." "Fair enough. Come inside where it is cooler and we can talk properly." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. Polished wood floors, real furniture that looked comfortable rather than just functional, paintings on the walls depicting mountain landscapes and cattle drives. It was a house that spoke of success and permanence, of a family that had put down deep roots. Ambrose led her to what was clearly his office, a room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large oak desk covered in papers and ledgers. He gestured to a comfortable chair by the window and took a seat behind the desk. "I appreciate you riding all the way out here," he said. "I know it is not a short trip." "I need to understand what you are proposing," Hannah said. "Exactly what the terms would be, what my obligations are, what yours are. I will not sign anything without understanding it completely." "Good. That is smart." Ambrose pulled out a clean sheet of paper. "Let me lay it out clearly. I propose leasing 50 acres of your grazing land for 10 years at a rate of $500 per year, paid quarterly. That money is yours free and clear, no strings attached. In addition, I will provide you with 50 head of young cattle to add to your existing herd. You will run them on your land, and I will provide breeding stock and veterinary care as needed. When we sell the cattle, we split the profits 60-40, with 60 going to you since they are running on your land and you are doing the daily work." Hannah's mind spun with numbers. $500 a year for the lease alone would cover her loan payments with money left over. And the cattle profits on top of that could let her actually improve her property, maybe hire a full-time hand, repair the barn properly. "What about the cattle I already have?" she asked. "Those are yours entirely. This arrangement only covers the cattle I provide. You can run your own herd alongside, and any profits from them are solely yours. And after 10 years, we renegotiate. Or you buy me out if you are in a position to do so, or we extend the arrangement, whatever makes sense for both of us at the time." It seemed too good to be true. Hannah searched for the catch. What if something happens to the cattle? "Disease or drought or rustlers, shared risk," Ambrose said. "If we lose cattle to circumstances beyond your control, we both take the loss proportionally. If we lose cattle to negligence on your part, That is a different story, but I do not think that will be an issue. And if we lose cattle to theft, well, that is what I pay ranch hands to prevent. Your hands would be on my property periodically to check on the herd and help with roundups and such. But I would not send anyone without your permission, and you would have full say over who comes onto your land and when. Hannah took a deep breath. I want this in writing. A proper contract that specifies everything we have discussed. Already drafting it, Ambrose said, tapping the paper in front of him. I will have my lawyer in Sacramento review it to make sure it is legally sound, and you can have a lawyer look at it too before you sign. I cannot afford a lawyer. Then I will pay for one to review it on your behalf, an independent one not associated with me. I want you to feel completely comfortable with the terms. That more than anything convinced Hannah that Ambrose was serious. A man trying to cheat her would never offer to pay for her own legal representation. She felt the last of her suspicion drain away, replaced by a tentative hope. Why are you doing this? She asked again. Please, I need to understand. Ambrose leaned back in his chair, his expression growing distant. My father built this ranch from nothing. He came to California in 1849 chasing gold like everyone else, but he was smart enough to realize that the real money was in feeding the miners, not joining them. He started with 20 acres and 6 cows, and he built it into what you see today through hard work and fair dealing. He taught me that success means nothing if you achieve it by stepping on people who are already down. He paused, his jaw tightening. 2 years ago, I lost my father to a heart attack. Sudden, no warning. And last year, I lost my mother to pneumonia. She just gave up after my father died, I think, lost the will to keep fighting. So now I run this place alone, and I have more money and land than I know what to do with. And I keep thinking about what my father would say if he saw what Hangtown has become. Men like Pemberton running roughshod over decent people, taking everything they worked for. My father would have been furious. He would have fought it tooth and nail. So you are fighting it for him, Hannah said softly. Maybe. Or maybe I am fighting it because I do not want to live in a world where the Pembertons win. Where being ruthless is rewarded and being decent gets you destroyed. Your father built something worth having, Hannah. He raised a daughter strong enough to keep it going after he was gone. That deserves to be protected, not stolen by a snake in a 3-piece suit. The raw emotion in his voice made Hannah's throat tighten. She understood what he was not saying, the grief that still haunted him, the loneliness of running a massive operation without family to share it with. In that moment, she saw past the successful rancher and confident man to someone who was just as wounded and weary as she was. All right, Hannah said. I accept your offer, pending the contract review, but yes, I accept. Ambrose's whole face transformed with his smile. Truly, truly. You have been fair and honest with me, and I believe you will continue to be. And frankly, I need the help. My pride is not worth losing my ranch over. It takes more courage to accept help than to refuse it, Ambrose said. My father taught me that too. He stood and extended his hand across the desk. Partners, then. Hannah stood and took his hand. His grip was firm and warm, calloused palm against calloused palm. Partners. They spent the next hour going over more details, discussing logistics and timing and practical matters. Ambrose explained that he would bring the cattle over within the week, along with some of his hands to help Hannah set up proper rotations and check that her fences were solid. He also offered to send over some surplus supplies he had, fence wire and nails and such, just to help get her operation back into top shape. I do not want charity, Hannah said carefully. It is not charity. It is investment. I need your fences solid so my cattle do not wander off. I need your operation running smoothly so the partnership works. Anything I give you improves the value of our arrangement." Put that way, Hannah could accept it. They were partners now. They would help each other. That was how it was supposed to work. When Hannah finally prepared to leave, the sun was past its peak and heading toward the western horizon. Ambrose walked her out to where Henry had Clover saddled and waiting. "Thank you," Hannah said as she mounted, "for everything. For yesterday, for today, for giving me a chance when you had no reason to." "I had every reason to," Ambrose said, looking up at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You remind me why this work matters, why the fight is worth it." Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. She ducked her head and gathered her reins. "I should go. Animals to feed. Of course. I will send word when the contract is ready for review. Should be a few days." Hannah nodded and turned Clover toward home, but she felt Ambrose's eyes on her back all the way across the yard. It was not until she was well down the trail that she let herself acknowledge the flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with nervousness about the partnership, and everything to do with the way Ambrose Turner looked at her. She told herself firmly that she was being foolish. This was business. Ambrose was helping her as a neighbor and future partner, nothing more. The fact that he was handsome and kind and made her feel safe for the first time in 2 years was completely irrelevant. She had no time for romantic notions. She had a ranch to run and a future to build. But all the way home, she could not stop thinking about storm-gray eyes and the way his rare smile transformed his entire face. The next several days passed in a blur of hard work. Hannah threw herself into preparing for the new cattle, walking her fence lines and making repairs, clearing brush from the far pasture, reorganizing the barn to accommodate more animals. Old Mr. Garrett came by and was thrilled to hear about the partnership, declaring it the best news he had heard all year. "Ambrose Turner is good people," he said as they restrung a section of barbed wire. "His father was the same way. Fair dealers, the whole family. You made the right choice trusting him, Miss Hannah." "I hope so," Hannah said, hammering a staple into the fence post. "I know so. That boy could have run you over same as Pemberton tried to do. Instead, he offered you a hand up. That tells you everything you need to know about his character." Hannah wanted to believe that. She was choosing to believe that. But a lifetime of her father's warnings about being careful who you trusted was hard to shake entirely. On the 4th day after her visit to the Circle T, a rider approached Hannah's ranch in late afternoon. She was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the hoofbeats and looked up to see Ambrose himself riding up the path. Her heart did an entirely inappropriate little skip. "Ambrose," she said, standing and brushing dirt from her skirt, "I was not expecting you. I hope that is all right. I have the contract finished, and I thought I would deliver it personally rather than send a hand." He dismounted and pulled a thick envelope from his saddlebag. "I also wanted to see your setup before we bring the cattle over, make sure we are not missing anything you might need." Hannah wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope. "That is thoughtful. Would you like some water? I have a pump by the house." "That would be welcome, thank you." They walked together toward the house, and Hannah was acutely aware of how shabby everything must look compared to the Circle T. Her house was a quarter the size of his. Her barn needed new shingles. Her whole operation was held together with spit and prayer. But if Ambrose noticed or cared, he did not show it. His eyes were scanning the property with what looked like professional assessment rather than judgment. Hannah pumped water into a tin cup and handed it to him, then pumped some for herself. They stood in the shade of the porch, and Ambrose drank deeply before speaking. "You have good bones here," he said. "Solid structures, decent layout. The fence work is excellent. Your father knew what he was doing. He was a good rancher, Hannah said. Better than I am, if I am honest. You are doing fine. Better than fine. Most people could not keep a place running alone like you have. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Hannah set down her cup and opened the envelope, pulling out the contract. It was several pages of dense legal language, but as she skimmed through it, she recognized the terms they had discussed. Everything was there, spelled out clearly. "This looks correct," she said. "You said you would arrange for a lawyer to review it." "I sent a telegram to a lawyer in Sacramento, a man named Mitchell who has no connection to me or my business. He should be in Hangtown by the end of the week. I have arranged for him to meet with you at the hotel, and I will cover his fees. He will go over the contract line by line and make sure you understand everything before you sign." It was more than fair. It was generous to the point of making Hannah uncomfortable. "You do not have to do all this." "I want to," Ambrose said simply. "I want you to feel confident in our arrangement. This is the start of hopefully a long partnership, and I want it built on trust." Trust. That word again. Hannah met his eyes and found herself caught by the intensity there. He really meant it. This was not a game or a manipulation. He genuinely wanted to help her, wanted them to succeed together. "All right," she said. "I will meet with the lawyer, and assuming everything is as straightforward as it appears, I will sign." "Good." Ambrose smiled, and there it was again, that transformation of his features from stern to almost boyish. "Now, show me around properly. Let me see what we are working with." They spent the next hour walking Hannah's property. Ambrose asking questions about water sources and grazing patterns, and where she planned to put the new cattle. He made suggestions that were genuinely helpful rather than condescending, pointing out a gully that could be dammed to create a small pond for drought years, noting that a particular hillside had good grass that was being underutilized. Hannah found herself relaxing around him, the easy rhythm of talking shop with someone who understood the work. They ended up at the creek that ran along the eastern boundary of her property, a pretty little stream lined with cottonwood trees. The water ran clear over smooth stones, and you could hear it babbling from 50 yards away. "This is beautiful," Ambrose said, crouching down to test the water temperature with his hand. "Year-round flow, even in the worst drought. It comes from springs up in the mountains. My father chose this land specifically because of the water." Smart man. Ambrose stood and looked around, taking in the trees and grass and the way the land rolled gently down to the creek. You could run 100 head comfortably with this kind of water access. "Maybe someday," Hannah said. "For now, I will settle for 62 and not losing my property." Ambrose turned to her, his expression serious. "You are not going to lose this place, Hannah. I promise you that. Even if the partnership does not work out for some reason, I will not let Pemberton or anyone else take your land. You have my word on that." The fierceness in his voice sent a shiver down Hannah's spine that had nothing to do with cold. She believed him. More than that, she trusted him, this man she had known for less than a week. It should have felt foolish, but it did not. It felt right. "Why do you care so much?" she asked softly. "I know what you said about your father and doing the right thing, but there is something else, is there not? Something personal." Ambrose was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the creek. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "I told you I lost both my parents in the last 2 years. What I did not tell you is that I lost someone else too. A woman I was planning to marry." Hannah's breath caught. "What happened?" Her name was Margaret. "We grew up together, our ranches neighbor each other to the south. Everyone always assumed we would end up together, and eventually we did. I asked her to marry me 3 years ago, and she said yes. We were planning a spring wedding." He paused, his jaw working. "Then she got sick. It started as a cough, turned into fever. The doctor said it was pneumonia. She died 6 weeks before our wedding date. Ambrose, I am so sorry. After she died, after my mother died, I realized how fragile everything is, how quickly you can lose the people and things you care about. And I decided that if I could not build a life with Margaret, I would at least build something that mattered. Something my father would be proud of. Helping people like you, fighting men like Pemberton, that gives my days meaning. Does that make sense? It does, Hannah said and meant it. She understood loss. She understood how grief could hollow you out and leave you scrambling for purpose. For what it is worth, I think your father would be very proud of the man you have become. Ambrose looked at her then, really looked at her, and Hannah felt something shift in the air between them. It was not just gratitude or partnership. It was something deeper, something that made her heart pound and her skin feel too tight. I should go, Ambrose said, but he did not move. It is getting late. Yes, Hannah agreed, also not moving. They stood there by the creek as the shadows lengthened, neither of them willing to break the moment. Finally, Ambrose cleared his throat and stepped back. I will have my foreman bring the cattle over in 3 days. That should give you time to meet with the lawyer and get the contract signed. Henry will coordinate with you about which pastures to use and all the logistics. That sounds fine. They walked back to the house in silence, a comfortable quiet that spoke of understanding rather than awkwardness. When Ambrose mounted his horse, he looked down at Hannah with an expression she could not quite decipher. "Thank you for trusting me," he said. "I know it is not easy." "Thank you for being trustworthy," Hannah replied. He tipped his hat and rode off, and Hannah stood watching until he disappeared around the bend in the trail. Then she went inside and sat down at her small kitchen table, her hands shaking slightly. She was in trouble. She was falling for Ambrose Turner, falling hard and fast, and she had no idea what to do about it. He was still grieving his lost love, still carrying the weight of losing everyone he cared about. The last thing he needed was some desperate rancher woman reading too much into his kindness. But the way he had looked at her by the creek, the gentleness in his voice when he shared his pain, the fierce protectiveness when he promised she would not lose her land, those things meant something. They had to. Hannah shook her head firmly. She was being a fool. This was business. Ambrose had been clear about his motivations, about wanting to honor his father's legacy and fight injustice. The fact that he was kind to her was just part of his character, not a sign of romantic interest. She needed to get her head straight and focus on what mattered. The partnership, the cattle, building her ranch back to profitability. Romance was a luxury she could not afford, especially romance with a man who was clearly still in love with a ghost. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed, Hannah could not stop thinking about storm-gray eyes and a rare smile that made her feel like the sun had come out after a long winter. The lawyer arrived in Hangtown 2 days later as promised. Mitchell was a precise man in his 50s with spectacles and a no-nonsense manner. He met Hannah at the hotel and spent 3 hours going through the contract line by line, explaining each clause and what it meant in practical terms. "This is one of the fairest partnership agreements I have seen," he said finally. "Mr. Turner has structured this entirely in your favor. The lease terms are generous, the profit split advantages you significantly, and there are multiple escape clauses if you need to end the arrangement early. Frankly, if I were representing Mr. Turner, I would advise him to negotiate harder. He is giving away money here." "He said he wants us both to succeed," Hannah said. "Well, if these terms are any indication, he means it." Mitchell closed the contract and looked at her over his spectacles. "My professional advice is to sign this immediately before he comes to his senses." Hannah laughed despite herself. "That is what I intend to do. She signed the contract right there, Mitchell witnessing and notarizing it with his official seal. When it was done, Hannah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. This was really happening. She had a real partnership with one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. Her ranch was going to survive. The next day dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for moving cattle. Hannah was up before sunrise, checking fence lines one last time and making sure the pastures were ready. Around mid-morning, she saw a dust cloud in the distance and knew it was Ambrose's crew bringing the cattle. Henry Thompson led the group, 5 cowhands driving 50 head of beautiful young stock. Ambrose himself brought up the rear, sitting easy in the saddle on a big roan gelding. Hannah's heart did that stupid flutter thing again at the sight of him. "Miss Rose," Henry called out, touching his hat brim. "We brought your cattle. Where would you like them?" Hannah pointed to the far pasture where the grass was thickest. "That section has fresh water and good grazing. We can rotate them to the other fields once they settle in." The hands went to work with practiced efficiency, guiding the cattle through the gate Hannah held open and spreading them out across the pasture. The new animals mingled with Hannah's small existing herd, and suddenly her ranch looked like an actual working operation rather than a struggling hobby. Ambrose dismounted and came to stand beside Hannah, both of them leaning on the fence watching the cattle settle. "They look good on your land," he said. "They look like hope," Hannah replied quietly. He glanced at her, something soft in his expression. "I am glad we could do this." The hands spent another hour checking fences and discussing care routines with Hannah. Henry proved to be a wealth of knowledge, sharing tips about everything from treating screwworm to spotting early signs of disease. By the time they were ready to leave, Hannah felt confident she could manage the expanded herd. "We will check back in a week," Henry said, "but you send word sooner if you need anything. Boss made it clear you are to be looked after proper." "I appreciate that," Hannah said. She caught Ambrose's eye across the yard and mouthed a silent thank you. He nodded in acknowledgement, a small smile playing at his lips. After the hands left, Hannah spent the rest of the day just watching her cattle, a stupid grin on her face. She had 62 head of prime stock grazing on her land. She had a partnership that would pay her bills and then some. She had a future that did not involve losing everything and ending up destitute. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Hannah sat on her porch with a cup of coffee and felt something she had not experienced in longer than she could remember. Contentment, maybe even happiness. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Ambrose was riding back up the trail, alone this time. Hannah set down her coffee and stood, her pulse quickening. "I thought you went home," she said as he dismounted. "I did. Then I realized I forgot something." Ambrose climbed the porch steps, and in the golden evening light he looked younger, less careworn. "What did you forget?" "To ask you something important." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "Hannah Rose, would you do me the honor of having dinner with me? Not business, not partnership discussion, just dinner, just you and me." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. "Are you asking to court me?" "I suppose I am." Ambrose reached up and very gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. "If you are amenable to that." "I know it is fast, and I know you have every reason to be cautious, but I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day I walked into that bank. You are brave and stubborn, and you make me remember that there are things worth fighting for beyond just business and revenge. So yes, I am asking to court you, if you will have me." Hannah's mind was spinning. This was insane. They had known each other less than 2 weeks. She had just started to get her life back on track. She had no business getting romantically involved with anyone, let alone her business partner. But her heart did not care about logic. Her heart was singing. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I would like that very much." Ambrose's face lit up with that transformative smile, and suddenly he looked like a man who had just been given the world. "Yeah? Yeah," Hannah said, smiling back. "How about tomorrow evening? I can pick you up around 6. There is a new restaurant in Placerville, about an hour's ride, that is supposed to be excellent." "That sounds lovely." They stood there grinning at each other like fools, and then Ambrose did something that made Hannah's heart stop. He leaned down and very softly, very carefully, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin, "for saying yes." Then he was back on his horse and riding away before Hannah could even process what had happened. She touched her forehead where she could still feel the warmth of his lips and felt her knees go weak. She was definitely in trouble. The next day, Hannah was useless for anything resembling productive work. She tried to focus on her chores, but found herself constantly checking the position of the sun, counting down the hours until Ambrose would arrive. She washed her hair in the creek, and then spent an hour trying to arrange it in a style more elegant than her usual practical braid. She pressed her best dress, the green cotton one that brought out her eyes, and polished her boots until they shone. When 6 o'clock finally came and she heard hoofbeats approaching, Hannah had to force herself not to run to the door like an overexcited child. She took a breath, smoothed her skirt, and walked out onto the porch with what she hoped was dignified calm. Ambrose had clearly put effort into his appearance as well. He wore dark trousers and a white shirt that looked freshly laundered, with a black vest and a string tie. His hair was combed back, and he had shaved so recently she could still smell the soap. He looked devastatingly handsome. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice a bit rough. "You clean up nicely yourself," Hannah replied, pleased that her voice came out steady. He helped her into the small buggy he had brought instead of riding horses, and they set off down the trail toward Placerville. The evening was warm but not hot, with a pleasant breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying each other's presence. "Tell me about yourself," Ambrose said eventually. "I know you inherited your parents' ranch and that you are stubborn as a mule, but what else? What do you like? What makes you happy?" Hannah thought about it. It had been so long since anyone asked her about herself as a person rather than a rancher or a debtor. "I like reading, though I do not get much time for it anymore. My mother taught me, and we used to read together in the evenings. I also like cooking, making things from scratch. There is something satisfying about taking raw ingredients and turning them into something nourishing." "What do you read?" "Everything I can get my hands on, though my collection is small. I have read all of Mr. Dickens and some of Mr. Twain. I especially loved his stories about life on the Mississippi. I dream of traveling someday, seeing the ocean and big cities, but I doubt I ever will." "Why not?" Ambrose asked. "You are young. There is time to see the world." "The ranch," Hannah said simply. "I cannot leave it. Not if I want to keep it. Maybe someday you will be able to hire someone to manage things while you travel, when the partnership makes you rich." He said it with a teasing lilt, and Hannah laughed. "If that day comes, I will hold you to showing me San Francisco. Deal?" Ambrose glanced at her, his expression turning more serious. "What about family? Do you have anyone besides the ranch?" Hannah shook her head. "My parents were only children. I have some distant cousins back east, but we have never met. It is just me. What about you?" "Same. My father had a brother who died young, and my mother's family disowned her when she married a rancher instead of the banker they had picked out for her. So the Circle T is all I have. The hands are like family, I suppose, but it is not the same as blood." They were both orphans, Hannah realized. Both alone in the world except for the land they worked. Maybe that was part of why they understood each other so well. The restaurant in Placerville was indeed excellent, a cozy place with checkered tablecloths and a menu featuring actual steaks and roasted vegetables. Ambrose ordered wine, which Hannah had never tasted before, and she discovered she liked the way it warmed her from the inside out. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Ambrose told her stories about learning to ranch from his father, about the time he fell off a horse into a creek, and his mother laughed so hard she cried. Hannah shared memories of her parents, of her father teaching her to rope cattle, and her mother insisting she learn to raid and cipher, because education mattered. They talked about the challenges of ranch life, the satisfaction of hard work done well, the way the land got into your blood until you could not imagine living anywhere else. By the time they finished eating, hours had passed, and the restaurant was preparing to close. They rode back toward Hangtown under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Ambrose drove with one hand, the other resting casually near Hannah's on the seat between them. Halfway home, his fingers found hers, lacing together in a gentle hold that made her heart race. "I had a wonderful time tonight," Ambrose said softly. "So did I." Hannah squeezed his hand. "Thank you for asking me. Can I see you again? Maybe not a formal dinner, just spend time together. I would like that." She hesitated, then decided to be brave. "You could come to my place for Sunday dinner if you want. I am not a fancy cook, but I can manage a decent roast chicken." Ambrose's smile was visible even in the darkness. "I would love that." When they reached Hannah's ranch, Ambrose helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. They stood close together in the moonlight, and Hannah could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I should let you get inside," Ambrose said, but he did not step back. "You should," Hannah agreed, not moving either. Then, slowly giving her every opportunity to pull away, Ambrose leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and gentle, a question more than a demand. Hannah's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart pounding as hard as her own. She kissed him back, pouring into it all the hope and longing and fear she had been carrying alone for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ambrose rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling for you," Hannah rose. "I need you to know that." "I am falling for you too," Hannah whispered. "It scares me, me too. But maybe it is okay to be scared together. Maybe it is." He kissed her once more, sweet and lingering, before climbing back into the buggy. Hannah stood on her porch and watched him drive away, her fingers touching her lips, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The next several weeks fell into a pattern that felt almost too good to be true. Ambrose came by Hannah's ranch nearly every day, sometimes on business to check the cattle, but more often just to see her. They would work together, mending fences or moving stock, and the labor felt lighter with someone to share it. In the evenings, they would sit on her porch and talk until the stars came out, learning each other's stories and dreams. On Sundays, they would have dinner together, sometimes at her place and sometimes at the Circle T. Hannah met more of Ambrose's hands and found them to be good men who clearly respected their boss. Henry the foreman took a particular shine to her, declaring that it was about time Ambrose found himself a good woman. "He has been too alone since Miss Margaret died," Henry told Hannah one Sunday while Ambrose was out checking on a horse. "That boy needs family, needs someone to come home to. I am glad he found you." Hannah blushed but felt warmed by the approval. She knew that Ambrose's people accepting her mattered, and having their blessing made their relationship feel more real somehow. The cattle partnership was exceeding all expectations. The herd was thriving on Hannah's land, and the lease payments allowed her to finally address long-neglected repairs and improvements. She hired Mr. Garrett full-time to help with the work, and the old man was delighted to have steady employment again. Together they reshingled the barn, planted a larger garden, and even built a proper chicken coop that the hens seemed to appreciate. Life felt almost normal, almost happy. Hannah would catch herself smiling at random moments, humming while she worked, daydreaming about a future that included Ambrose. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. One evening in late September, about 2 months after they met, Ambrose arrived at Hannah's ranch carrying a wrapped package. He had an expression Hannah could not quite read, nervous but excited. "What is that?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Open it and see." Hannah unwrapped the package carefully and gasped. Inside were 3 books, beautiful leather-bound volumes that looked brand new. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Little Women, and a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "Ambrose, these must have cost a fortune. You said you loved reading but did not have many books. I was in Sacramento last week for business and saw these in a bookshop. I thought of you." He looked almost shy, this confident rancher suddenly uncertain. "If you do not like them, I can exchange them for something else." "Like them? I love them." Hannah clutched the books to her chest, tears stinging her eyes. "No one has given me a gift like this since my mother died. Thank you." She set the books carefully on the porch railing, and then threw her arms around Ambrose's neck, kissing him soundly. He responded with enthusiasm, his arms wrapping around her waist and lifting her slightly off the ground. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and breathless, Ambrose's eyes were shining. "I will buy you 100 books if you kiss me like that every time," he said. "You will spoil me. Good. You deserve to be spoiled." He set her down but kept his arms around her. "Hannah, I need to tell you something." His tone made her nervous. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right, actually, and that is what I need to say." He took a breath. "I know it has only been 2 months. I know most people would say this is too fast. But I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I am in love with you." Hannah rose, completely, utterly in love with you. Hannah felt tears spill over, but they were happy tears. "I love you too. I have been scared to say it, scared to let myself feel it, but I do. I love you." Ambrose kissed her again, slow and deep, and Hannah felt like she was drowning in the best possible way. When he pulled back, his expression was serious. "I want a future with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build something together, not just a business partnership but a life. I know I am not perfect. I still grieve my parents and Margaret sometimes. I work too hard and I am too stubborn and I probably have 100 flaws you have not discovered yet. But I will spend every day trying to make you happy if you will let me." Hannah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might explode. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Not yet." Ambrose smiled gently. "I am giving you fair warning that I am going to ask you soon, very soon. I want you to have time to think about it, to be sure, because when I ask, I want you to say yes without any doubts." "I do not have any doubts," Hannah said fiercely. "I have never been more sure of anything. Then when I ask, you will say yes. Yes. Whenever you ask, the answer is yes." Ambrose's whoop of joy startled the chickens, and then he was spinning Hannah around in his arms, both of them laughing like children. They settled on the porch steps, Ambrose's arm around Hannah's shoulders, her head resting against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. "I was thinking spring," Ambrose said softly. "April or May, when the wildflowers are blooming. A small ceremony, just people we care about. Then you could move to the Circle T, or I could move here, or we could build something new together. Whatever you want." "The Circle T makes sense," Hannah said practically. It is the larger operation and you already have everything set up, but I do not want to lose my ranch. This place is my heritage. We would not lose it. We could hire someone to live here and manage it, keep it as part of our combined operation. Or we could use it as a base for expansion, breeding stock or training horses, or whatever makes sense. The point is we would make decisions together, equal partners in everything. Hannah tilted her head to look up at him. You really mean that, do not you? Equal partners. I really do. I watched my father and mother build the Circle T together. They were true partners in business and in life. That is the marriage I want. Not you as my housekeeper or me as your provider, but both of us building something together. That sounds perfect, Hannah whispered. They sat together as the sun set and the first stars appeared, making plans and dreaming about the future. Hannah felt a peace she had never experienced before. She had spent so long just surviving, fighting to keep her head above water. Now, suddenly, she could breathe. She could dream. She could imagine a life that was about more than just grinding work and constant fear of losing everything. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Ambrose was true to his word and proposed officially in October, riding up to Hannah's ranch with a ring his grandmother had worn, a simple gold band with a small diamond. Hannah said yes before he even finished asking, and they sealed it with a kiss that made her toes curl. They set the wedding date for April 15th, giving them time to make arrangements and prepare. Hannah worked with a seamstress in town to create a dress from ivory satin, simple but elegant. Ambrose arranged for a minister to come out to the Circle T, and for a celebration afterward with food and music. Word of the engagement spread through Hangtown quickly, and reactions were mixed. Most people were happy for them. The romantic story of the rancher saving the desperate woman and falling in love. But there were whispers, too, suggestions that Hannah had trapped Ambrose, or that he was being foolish marrying so soon after Margaret's death. A few of the church ladies made snide comments about propriety and hasty decisions. Hannah tried to ignore the gossip, but it stung. One day in late November, she was in the general store buying supplies when she overheard two women talking. I give it a year before he realizes his mistake, one said. She is not suitable for a man like Ambrose Turner, too rough, too independent. A rancher's wife should know her place. I hear she trapped him deliberately, the other replied. Played on his sympathy until he felt obligated to marry her. Poor man, saddled with a burden when he thought he was being charitable. Hannah's face burned, but before she could respond, a firm voice cut through the store. I suggest you ladies find something better to discuss than my future wife. Ambrose stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. The two women paled and scurried out of the store like frightened rabbits. Ambrose walked over to Hannah and took her hand. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I am fine, just gossip. It is not fine and it is not just gossip. It is cruel and untrue. He raised his voice so everyone in the store could hear. Let me make something very clear to everyone in this town. I am marrying Hannah Rose because I love her, because she is brave and strong and makes me a better man. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly, and I promise you will not enjoy that conversation. The store fell silent. Then old Mr. Garrett, who had been browsing nails, started clapping slowly. Others joined in, and suddenly Hannah found herself blinking back tears as the decent people of Hangtown showed their support. Ambrose paid for her supplies along with his own and escorted her out to the wagon. I am sorry you had to hear that, he said. You do not need to defend me. Yes, I do. You are going to be my wife. That means your battles are my battles. He cupped her face in his hands. I chose you, Hannah, not out of obligation or sympathy, but because I love you. Do not ever doubt that. Hannah kissed him fiercely, not caring who might see. "I love you too." Winter came to the foothills, bringing cold nights and occasional snow. The cattle were moved to lower pastures with better shelter, and ranch work shifted to indoor tasks and maintenance. Hannah and Ambrose spent long evenings planning their future, discussing everything from breeding programs to which rooms at the Circle T would be theirs after the wedding. For Christmas, they exchanged simple gifts. Hannah made Ambrose a new shirt from fabric she had saved for months to buy, stitching it carefully by lamplight. Ambrose gave her a beautiful carved music box that played a soft melody when opened. "It was my mother's," he said, as Hannah turned it in her hands, marveling at the craftsmanship. "She would want you to have it." Hannah felt the weight of that gift, the significance of Ambrose sharing his mother's possessions with her. It meant acceptance, meant he truly saw her as family. They celebrated Christmas at the Circle T with all of Ambrose's ranch hands, a raucous affair involving too much food and terrible singing. Henry got drunk and gave a rambling speech about how happy he was that his boss was finally settling down. Ambrose's face turned red, but he was grinning the whole time. New Year's came and went, bringing 1876 and the promise of new beginnings. The winter was mild that year, and by early March, wildflowers were already starting to bloom across the hillsides. Hannah finished her wedding dress and made sure all the details were arranged. Ambrose worked with his hands to prepare the ranch house, adding feminine touches to rooms that had been purely masculine for too long. In late March, an unexpected visitor arrived at Hannah's ranch. She was working in the garden when she heard a buggy approaching and looked up to see Cyrus Pemberton climbing down. Her whole body went tense with alarm. "What do you want?" she demanded, grabbing the hoe she had been using like a weapon. Pemberton held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Peace, Miss Rose. I am not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here? To apologize?" The words seemed to cost him effort. "And to return something that belongs to you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a bank draft. "This is for the excess payments you made on your loan, the money you gave me under false pretenses, plus interest. It totals $460. Hannah stared at the draft, not trusting herself to speak. This was more money than she had seen in one place in years. "Why?" She finally managed. Pemberton's face twisted. "Because your fiancé made it very clear what would happen if I did not make things right. He has detailed evidence of my activities in Sacramento, and he has promised to send it to the authorities if I step out of line even once. I am on a short leash, Miss Rose, and part of the terms of my freedom is making restitution to those I have wronged. Ambrose did this. Ambrose did this." Pemberton's voice dripped with resentment. "You are a lucky woman, Miss Rose. Not many people have someone willing to go to such lengths for them." "I know," Hannah said softly. She took the bank draft, still wary. "Is there anything else? Just this. I have been ordered to provide you with a letter stating that your original loan is satisfied in full, and that you owe nothing further to Hangtown Bank and Trust. All the corrected documents will be filed with the county recorder." He handed over an envelope. "You are free and clear, Miss Rose." "Congratulations." With that, he climbed back into his buggy and drove away. Hannah stood holding the draft and envelope, her hands shaking. Ambrose had done this. He had not just saved her ranch temporarily, he had made sure she was completely protected. He had hunted down every wrong Pemberton had committed and used it to ensure justice. Hannah saddled Clover and rode directly to the Circle T, not even bothering to change out of her work clothes. She found Ambrose in the barn, working with a young horse. He looked up in surprise when she burst in. "Hannah, what is wrong?" She did not answer with words. She just walked up to him and kissed him with everything she had, pouring her love and gratitude and fierce joy into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, Ambrose looked dazed. "What was that for?" he asked. "Pemberton came to see me. He returned the money and cleared my loan completely. You did that." Ambrose had the grace to look sheepish. "I may have applied some pressure." "Some pressure?" Hannah laughed through tears. "You terrified him into honesty. You made him pay back everything he stole. You protected me even though I am already safe because we are together. You were never going to be completely safe until Pemberton was dealt with properly," Ambrose said. "I wanted you to start our marriage without any shadows hanging over you. You deserve that." Hannah cupped his face in her hands. "I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I am so grateful. You did not have to do anything. You just have to be you." He kissed her softly. "That is more than enough." The weeks leading up to the wedding flew by in a whirlwind of final preparations. Hannah spent her last week as a single woman staying with a widow in town, propriety demanding they not see each other too much before the ceremony. It was torture being apart from Ambrose even for those few days, but tradition was tradition. Finally, April 15th dawned clear and warm, perfect spring weather. Hannah dressed carefully in her ivory gown, her hair styled by the seamstress who had become a friend during the dress fittings. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked happy. Truly, deeply happy. The ceremony was held in the front yard of the Circle T, under an arch covered in wildflowers that Henry and the other hands had constructed. Chairs were set up for the small group of guests, ranch workers and a few townspeople who had become friends. Old Mr. Garrett would walk Hannah down the aisle, standing in for the father she missed terribly on this day. When the time came, Hannah took Mr. Garrett's arm and walked toward the arch where Ambrose waited. He wore a new black suit that made him look devastatingly handsome, his dark hair neatly combed for once. But it was his eyes that captured her, storm gray and shining with emotion as he watched her approach. The minister was brief and to the point, speaking of love and partnership and the sacred bond of marriage. Hannah barely heard the words. She was too focused on Ambrose, on the way his hands trembled slightly when he took hers, on the rough emotion in his voice when he repeated his vows. "I, Ambrose Turner, take you, Hannah Rose, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you as your equal partner in all things. I promise to share your burdens and celebrate your joys. I promise to build a life with you that honors what we have both lost and celebrates what we have found. From this day forward, you are my home and I am yours." Hannah's voice shook when it was her turn. "I, Hannah Rose, take you, Ambrose Turner, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you with everything I have, to stand with you through whatever comes, to be your partner in work and in life. I promise to honor the trust you have placed in me and to never take for granted the gift of your love. You have given me hope when I had none, and I promise to spend my life making you as happy as you have made me." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ambrose pulled Hannah into his arms and kissed her like a man dying of thirst who had finally found water. The small crowd cheered and applauded, but Hannah barely noticed. All she knew was Ambrose, his arms around her, his heart beating against hers, the taste of promise on his lips. The celebration afterward was joyful and loud. There was more food than seemed possible, roasted meats and fresh bread and pies of every variety. A fiddle player Ambrose had hired provided music, and people danced on the grass under the spring sun. Hannah was whirled from partner to partner, laughing as Henry spun her in circles and blushing as Mr. Garrett gave her a grandfatherly kiss on the cheek. But her favorite dance was with her husband. That word sent thrills through her every time she thought it. Husband. Ambrose was her husband. They swayed together to a slow song as the sun set, his arms wrapped around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "Happy," he murmured in her ear. "Happier than I knew was possible," Hannah replied. "Good, because this is just the beginning. We have a whole life ahead of us." Hannah Turner. Hannah Turner. Her new name. She liked the sound of it. The party wound down as darkness fell, guests gradually departing with well wishes and congratulations. The ranch hands tactfully made themselves scarce, heading to the bunkhouse or into town. Finally, Hannah and Ambrose were alone, standing together on the porch of the house that was now theirs. "Are you ready to see your new home properly?" Ambrose asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I have been here dozens of times. Not as my wife, not as the mistress of this house." He scooped her up in his arms before she could protest, making her squeal with surprise. "I am carrying you over the threshold. It is tradition." He carried her through the door and up the stairs to the master bedroom, a large room with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. Hannah had helped him redecorate it, replacing the heavy dark furniture with lighter pieces, adding curtains and quilts and little touches that made it feel less like a bachelor's quarters and more like a real home. Ambrose set her down carefully beside the bed, and suddenly the air was charged with awareness. They had kissed plenty, had held each other and shared passionate embraces. But this was different. This was their wedding night, the moment when they would truly become one. "Are you nervous?" Ambrose asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "A little," Hannah admitted, "but more excited than nervous." "Me too," he smiled. "We do not have to rush anything, we have the rest of our lives." "I do not want to wait another minute," Hannah said, and reached up to pull him down into a kiss. They came together with a passion tempered by tenderness, learning each other's bodies with reverent hands and whispered words of love. Ambrose was gentle and patient, putting Hannah's comfort before his own need, and when they finally joined together fully, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. They moved together, breathing as one, and when release came it was shattering and perfect. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Ambrose's arms wrapped around Hannah as she rested her head on his chest. Through the open window, they could hear night birds singing and the distant lowing of cattle. "I love you," Ambrose said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that." "I love you too," Hannah replied. "Thank you for saving me, not just from Pemberton but from loneliness, from feeling like I had to face the world alone." "You are never alone again," Ambrose promised. "Whatever comes, we face it together." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the moonlight streaming through the windows painting everything silver. Outside, the ranch that was now theirs together slept peacefully under the stars. The first year of marriage was a period of adjustment and joy in equal measure. Hannah moved her belongings from her old ranch to the Circle T, though they kept her property as part of their operation. They hired a young couple to live there and manage the herd, giving them a percentage of the profits in exchange for their work. It proved to be an excellent arrangement. Hannah threw herself into managing the household and working alongside Ambrose on ranch business. She discovered she had a talent for the financial side of things, keeping detailed books and finding ways to maximize their profits. Ambrose was impressed and delighted, happily handing over the ledgers and account management to her capable hands. They worked hard but also made time for each other, for lazy Sunday mornings in bed and evening rides through their land just to watch the sunset. Ambrose taught Hannah to shoot better, and she taught him to cook more than just beans and bacon. They argued sometimes, both of them too stubborn and used to running their own shows, but they learned to compromise and listen to each other. In the fall, nearly a year and a half after they first met, Hannah realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure before telling Ambrose, barely able to contain her excitement. "I am pregnant," she said one evening over dinner, watching his face carefully. Ambrose froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Then a grin spread across his face that was brighter than the sun. "Truly. Truly. The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I went to town. We are having a baby." Ambrose was out of his chair and pulling her into his arms before she could blink. He spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then set her down carefully as if she might break. "Are you happy?" Hannah asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy." Ambrose cupped her face in his hands, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Hannah, you have given me everything. Love, partnership, and now a family. I am more than happy. I am blessed beyond measure." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Hannah continued working for the first several months, only slowing down when her belly grew too large to make mounting horses comfortable. Ambrose became hilariously overprotective, constantly worrying that she was doing too much or not eating enough. Hannah found it endearing even when it was annoying. In late May of 1877, Hannah went into labor. It was long and difficult, as first births often are, but when the midwife finally placed a squalling infant in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. They had a son, healthy and red-faced and perfect. "What should we name him?" Hannah asked, exhausted but elated as Ambrose sat beside her on the bed, staring at his son with wonder. "I was thinking about my father," Ambrose said softly. "His name was Andrew, but only if you like it." "Andrew Turner," Hannah tested the name. "I love it. Andrew it is." Little Andrew thrived, growing from a tiny red thing into a chubby baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Ambrose proved to be a devoted father, happy to walk the floor with a crying infant at 2 in the morning, or change dirty diapers without complaint. Watching him with their son made Hannah fall in love with him all over again. The years that followed were filled with hard work and deep happiness. The ranch prospered under their joint management, the cattle operation expanding until they were one of the largest suppliers in 3 counties. Hannah's little ranch proved perfect for breeding stock, and they developed a reputation for producing high-quality animals. Andrew grew from baby to toddler to a sturdy little boy who loved following his father around the ranch. When he was 3, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time they had a daughter, Elizabeth, with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. 2 years after that came another son, Michael, who was colicky and fussy but grew into a sweet-natured child. With 3 children and a thriving ranch, life was busy and chaotic and wonderful. The house that had once been so quiet and lonely was now filled with laughter and noise and love. Hannah would sometimes stop in the middle of her day and just marvel at the life she had built, at how different everything was from that terrible day when she thought she would lose everything. Cyrus Pemberton, true to the terms Ambrose had imposed, cleaned up his act. The detailed evidence Ambrose had gathered remained in a safe in Sacramento, a constant threat that kept the banker honest. Pemberton never became a good man, but he stopped being an actively evil one, and that was enough. He left Hannah and Ambrose alone, and they returned the favor. Old Mr. Garrett eventually retired fully, too old for even light work. But Ambrose made sure he had a small house on ranch property and enough money to live comfortably. The old man spent his last years playing with Andrew, Elizabeth, and Michael, telling them stories about their grandparents and teaching them ranch lore. When he passed peacefully in his sleep at age 76, the whole family mourned him as the grandfather the children had never had by blood, but had earned through love. The years turned into decades. Andrew grew into a fine young man who took to ranching like he was born to it, eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations. Elizabeth proved to have her mother's head for numbers and managed the financial side of the business. Michael became a veterinarian, studying in San Francisco, before returning home to care for the ranch animals and those of neighbors for miles around. Hannah and Ambrose grew older together, their hair turning gray but their love never fading. They still worked the ranch, though less actively as the years took their toll. They spent their evenings on the porch, watching grandchildren play in the yard and talking about the life they had built. "You ever think about how it all started?" Hannah asked one evening when she was 53 and Ambrose was 55. "That day in Pemberton's office. All the time," Ambrose said, his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that had become automatic over 30 years of marriage. "I think about how close I came to not going into town that day, how I almost sent Henry instead. How different our lives would be if I had not looked through that window at the exact right moment." "You think it was fate?" Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder. "That we were meant to find each other. I think we were two lonely people who got lucky," Ambrose said. "And then we chose to turn that luck into something lasting. That is what I am most proud of, Hannah. Not the ranch or the money or any of it, but that we chose each other every single day. That we built something real. We did we not?" Hannah smiled. "Built something worth having." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. In the house behind them, they could hear Elizabeth helping her own daughter with homework. Andrew and his wife were staying for dinner, their voices drifting from the kitchen. Michael was out in the barn, tending to a sick horse. The ranch, their home, was full of life and love. Hannah thought back to that terrified young woman who had walked into a bank clutching a satchel of money, certain she was about to lose everything. She thought about how Ambrose had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not even known how to speak. She thought about all the days since, the struggles and joys, the births and deaths, the ordinary moments that had added up to an extraordinary life. "Thank you," she said softly to Ambrose. "For what?" "For walking through that door, for caring enough to help a stranger, for loving me. For all of it." Ambrose kissed her temple, a gesture as familiar and comforting as breathing. "Thank you for saying yes, for trusting me, for building this life with me. I love you, Hannah Turner, today and every day." "I love you too," Hannah replied. They sat together as darkness fell and the stars came out. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting. The ranch would continue long after they were gone, passing to their children and grandchildren, a legacy of hard work and fair dealing. But more than that, they left behind a legacy of love, of two people who chose each other and kept choosing each other through everything life threw at them. Years later, when Ambrose passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 78, Hannah held his hand and whispered her love one last time. She missed him terribly in the years that followed, but she was never truly alone. She was surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, by the ranch they had built together, by memories of a love that had sustained her through everything. When Hannah died 4 years later at age 76, her family gathered to lay her to rest beside Ambrose on a hillside, overlooking the land they had loved. The stone marker bore simple words: "Hannah Rose Turner, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she built a life worth living." Next to it, Ambrose's marker read: "Ambrose Andrew Turner, beloved husband, father, grandfather, he saved more than he knew together. Even in death, they watched over the land they had worked, the family they had raised, and the legacy they had created." Their story became ranch legend, told to new generations as an example of how kindness and courage could change everything. How one man walking through a door at the right moment could alter the course of a life. How two people facing their own pain and loneliness could find each other and build something beautiful. The ranch continued to prosper under Andrew's leadership, and eventually his son took over, and then his grandson. The original 200 acres Hannah's father had cleared grew into an empire spanning thousands of acres, but the heart of it remained that small ranch house where Hannah had nearly lost everything, and instead found her future. In town, a historical marker was eventually placed outside what had been Hangtown Bank and Trust, telling the story of the day a banker tried to steal a woman's deed, and a rancher walked in and made him hand it back. It became a symbol of justice and the idea that sometimes, if you are lucky, help arrives exactly when you need it most. But for Hannah and Ambrose, it was never about symbols or legends. It was about two people who found each other in the Wild West, in a moment of crisis that became a moment of grace. It was about choosing love over loneliness, partnership over pride, and hope over despair. It was about building something together that lasted long after they were gone. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the land or the money or the success, but the simple truth that they had loved each other well and raised a family that knew how to do the same. They had taken broken pieces and built something whole. They had taken a moment of darkness and let it lead to a lifetime of light. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and the passing of years. But the love they built never truly ended. It lived on in their descendants, in the land they had nurtured, in the values they had instilled. It lived on in every young couple who heard their story and believed that true love was possible, that second chances existed, that walking through the right door at the right moment could change everything. Hannah and Ambrose Turner had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And in the vast sweep of history, in the wild and untamed West they had called home, that was more than enough. That was everything.